Before you press play, ask yourself this. How young is too young to be called a bride? Because in a time when girls were born into contracts, not into choices, one child was dressed in silk, crowned in expectation, and handed over to a man old enough to be her father. Not for love, not for family, but for power. This is the story of a forgotten queen. A little girl married off at 6 to a king almost 5 times her age. A crown she never asked for. A destiny she could never escape. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here, we whisper the stories they tried to bury. The ones that stain the scrolls. The ones too dark for the textbooks. And once you've heard them, you'll never look at history the same again. Now let us begin. She was born in silence. Not in the cold, but in expectation. Her birth was a transaction before she took her first breath. A royal bloodline. Female. Blonde. Blue-eyed. The perfect vessel. The perfect pawn. Her name? Erased. Or more precisely, rewritten. You won't find her name etched into stone beside monarchs. You won't see portraits of her hanging in gilded halls. She's the kind of queen history preferred to forget, because remembering her would mean remembering what she was forced to endure. She was 6 years old when she was told she was to be married. At 6, most children are playing in the dirt, chasing butterflies, whimpering over scraped knees. She was fitted for a wedding gown. The king, 29, broad-shouldered, bearded, battle-hardened, known for his conquests, military, political, and personal. He needed a queen, but not a partner, a symbol, a treaty, and a girl so young, so pliable, so completely controllable that she would never challenge his authority. The arrangement was seen as strategic, wise even. Nobles nodded in agreement. Clergy blessed the union. After all, in their world, a girl's body wasn't her own. It was property, a commodity, and no one questioned the king. The wedding was lavish. Flowers imported from the Low Countries. Musicians plucked lutes beneath archways of silk. Courtiers and jewels lined up to offer blessings they didn't mean. But beneath the pomp and circumstance was a child in panic. A little girl with a braid too tight and a corset she couldn't breathe in, staring up at a man who smelled of sweat, wine, and power. When they placed the crown on her head, it slid forward. It was too heavy, too wide, like the life that came with it. They called her his little angel. How poetic, how grotesque. She was escorted to her new chambers. Not the nursery, not a princess's room, a queen's bed. She sat there alone that night, legs swinging off the edge. Her feet couldn't even reach the floor. Servants whispered. Some pitied her. Some envied her. She was chosen, after all. But being chosen does not mean being free. For the first few months, the king left her untouched. Some say it was mercy. Others say it was strategy. He waited for her to ripen. He paraded her through court, let foreign dignitaries marvel at her beauty, her quiet obedience, her eerie, practiced smile. She is radiant, they'd say. She is well-mannered. She'll make a fine queen. They didn't see the bruises on her ankles from standing too long during ceremonies. The raw skin beneath her gowns from lace rubbing against child's flesh. The nightmares that made her scream so loud, the guards would lock the doors to drown her out. But then came a consummation. The court called it the night of maturity. She was 9. She had barely begun to understand what her body was. And now it belonged to a king. She was scrubbed, perfumed, powdered. Her hair curled until it smoked. Her wrists painted with rose oil. When he entered the room, she didn't look at him. Not out of defiance. She had simply learned to look past him. What happened behind that door was written in coded language by royal scribes. Union successfully affirmed. Queen fulfilled her duty. But behind the ink was a scream. Behind the velvet curtains, torn innocence. And in the silence that followed, a girl who had to learn how to walk again. Still want to know why she vanished from history? Because history is written by the victors. And she was never allowed to win. After that night, she wasn't a child anymore. Not because she had changed, but because they had changed the way they looked at her. Before, she was a curiosity, a royal doll, the king's little angel. Now, she was a vessel. And a vessel's worth is measured by one thing only, what it can produce. So they watched her, Her maids tracked the cycle of the moon against the stains on her linens. Midwives were called before there was any sign of blood. Physicians whispered over her belly like augurs reading the entrails of a lamb. Was she fertile? Would she bear? Would this little girl give England an heir? She was barely 10 when the pressure began. You must eat more, they said, though she could barely stomach soup. You must rest, they said, though she hadn't slept in months. You must please him, they said, though her body screamed each time he touched her. Her face was powdered, even when she vomited from nerves. Her posture corrected, even as her bones ached from malnutrition. Her smile rehearsed, even as her teeth loosened from illness. They did not care for the child, only the womb. The king, once so publicly affectionate, began to grow impatient. He visited her chambers less often, and when he did, it was not with love. It was with duty, as if checking a broken machine. Frustration replaced warmth. Demands replaced words. She could feel it. The clock ticking down. She was running out of time. A child running out of time to become a mother. When the first signs of blood appeared, there was celebration. Not from her, but from the court. The bells rang. A feast was held. She bled quietly, in pain, alone on satin sheets, while men toasted the hope of an heir in the hall below. They called her ripe now. They called her a true woman. She was 11. The following year, she was declared pregnant. The physicians declared it a miracle, a sign that England's throne was secure. But no one asked her what she felt. She hadn't known what was happening. She thought the sickness, the swelling, the pain were signs she was dying. And in some ways, she was. The child never came. The pregnancy was lost in the 5th month. They called it a miscarriage. But in the quiet corners of the palace, the whispers were darker. Too young, said some. Too thin, said others. She cried every night, whispered one maid, even in her sleep. And still they blamed her. A queen who could not give an heir was no queen at all. Even if she was 12, her body never recovered. She stopped growing. Her eyes sunk. Her skin turned pale and paper-thin. The royal portraits stopped being commissioned. What's the point of painting what no longer pleases? Her meals were smaller now. Her gowns darker. Even her voice changed. No longer high and sweet, but flat, toneless. A whisper without will. The king began spending more time away. Hunting, drinking, visiting the beds of women who smiled with painted mouths and practiced seduction. Women who were not children, who could offer what she could not. And yet, he never released her. Because even broken things can be useful in court. She became a symbol of failure. A crown with no power. A girl no one dared to speak to directly. Her chambers grew quieter. Her servants rotated more often. No friends. No tutors. No one who stayed long enough to see behind her eyes. And still she endured. Not because she was strong, but because there was nothing else to do. One day, she found a bird in the garden. A sparrow with a broken wing, dragging itself across the stones. She held it gently, wrapping in cloth. But when she asked for a physician to care for it, the steward scoffed. You waste medicine on a bird, your majesty? The next day it was gone. She never saw it again. She didn't cry. She didn't ask. Because she knew she was the sparrow. When her 13th birthday came, no one celebrated. There was no cake, no song, no gown, just a note from the king. Attend court. Be silent. Look the part. And so she did. She stood beside him, pale as a ghost, and smiled for the ambassadors. And as they praised her beauty, her grace, her restored health, her lips did not tremble. She had learned to be empty. A vessel cannot crack if it is already hollow. That night, she asked her maid to remove her corset. I want to breathe, she said. The maid hesitated, but did as she was told. And for the first time in years, the queen fell asleep, not tied, not compressed, not sculpted into something she wasn't. She dreamt of the sparrow. This time it flew. Time did not pass in days. For her, it passed in silences, in glances, in locked doors and empty halls. By her 14th year, she was no longer addressed by name, only by title. Your Majesty, the Queen, she, as if her presence was something shameful. A symbol of failure no one wanted to look at directly. She had become the phantom of the court, always present, never touched. A shadow veiled in silk, wandering between columns that echoed with footsteps not her own. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that she was beginning to remember who she once was. She started walking the gardens again, not for leisure, but for survival. Each step was a rebellion, each breath a refusal to disappear. She would run her fingers along the hedges, collecting the scent of rosemary and decay. She would close her eyes and pretend she was far away, in another country, another world, another body. Sometimes she would hum softly, not songs from the court, but songs from her childhood, faint echoes from a life stolen before it began. It was dangerous. Even that, a queen should not remember being a girl. But she did. The king noticed. Not her strength, not her sorrow, but the whispers, the sideways glances of courtiers when she passed, the flickers of pity that rippled through noble women when she stood too still, too quiet. He hated it. Pity made him look weak, a man who married a child and broke her. So, he made a decision. She would be replaced. He married again, quietly, efficiently. The new queen was of age, trained, bred for obedience, but also fertility. She curtsied lower, laughed louder, bled regularly. The people adored her. And the forgotten queen? She was moved, not to exile, not to death, but to a smaller chamber at the far end of the castle, where no bells rang and no names were announced. She was now the widow of a living man. Her crown was removed, not in public, not with ceremony, but in silence. A maid entered one morning with trembling hands. In them, a box lined with velvet. The girl, no, the woman now knew what it was. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She simply reached up and removed the crown herself. Her fingers lingered on the gold. For a moment, it felt heavy again. Then it was gone, and in its place, nothing, not even her name. She was 15. The years that followed were blank parchment. No historians recorded them. No portraits were painted. No letters survived. But within the silence, she endured. She grew thin, but not weak. She read by candlelight. She learned to write in Latin. She copied poetry in the margins of prayer books. She learned the names of the birds that nested outside her window. And slowly, she began to think of herself not as his queen, but as a person, not a vessel, not a title, a soul, one that still remembered how to feel. One winter, a new servant was assigned to her rooms, a girl no older than she had been when her own crown was placed. The girl was clumsy, nervous, afraid, and so the forgotten queen did something no one expected. She smiled, a real smile, not the royal kind, not the painted kind, the kind that says, "I see you, I remember you, I was you," and for the first time, someone smiled back without orders. That small connection, that fleeting moment, reminded her of something dangerous. Hope. But hope, in a castle built on silence, is a threat. Soon, the girl was reassigned, and she was alone again. But the warmth remained. It burned like a candle in her chest, small but defiant. A light no one else could snuff out. She no longer dreamed of thrones. She dreamed of escape. But where would she go? She had no land, no allies, no name that held power. She had only stories, memories that flickered behind her eyes. A history no one wrote down. A girl married at 6, crowned in silence, buried alive in silk, and yet still breathing, still here. She began to write. With ink stolen from the steward's desk, she scribbled her story in scraps of linen, behind the wallpaper, along the wooden beams of her chamber. She wrote the truth, of her childhood, of her wedding, of the night they said she became a woman, of the blood, the pain, the emptiness. She wrote it all, and then she sealed it away, not for herself, but for someone to find. Someday, because even if they erased her name from history books, she would not let them erase her voice. The palace aged around her. Walls once gilded faded into mildew and shadow. Curtains moth-eaten. Servants replaced, again and again, until no one remembered the girl who used to wear the crown. The new queen bore children, sons, heirs, and the old queen? She became a rumor. She still lives? They would ask, eyebrows raised. She was just a child. Another would whisper, I heard she went mad. Madness was easier to believe than invisibility, because to vanish while still breathing, that was a fate worse than madness. She was now 19, older than the king had been when she was married to him. But in truth, she looked much older, her body worn by solitude, her skin paled by rooms without light, her joints stiffened by winters without fire. She no longer asked for anything. No dresses, no perfumes, no letters. Because to ask is to admit you expect something in return. And the only thing she had learned to expect was silence. One night, a tremor struck her. Fever, sweating, shivering. No one came for hours. They had stopped checking on her regularly. She was too quiet to be a threat, too forgotten to be a priority. When the steward finally arrived, she was curled on the floor, her dress soaked through, whispering a name no one recognized. Not the king's, not her father's, perhaps her own, the one they took from her. She recovered slowly, but something inside her had shifted. Her hands trembled when she wrote. Her legs could not carry her far. She began to lose her words. Names slipped through her fingers like sand. She would speak to birds outside her window, as if they were old friends. And in truth they were, because the birds never asked her to be more than what she was. Just a voice, just a breath, still alive. The court issued no statement about her condition. Why would they? She was no longer useful, no longer beautiful, no longer royal. The new queen ruled beside the king, smiling, powerful, fertile, while the forgotten one waited for nothing in particular. Not death, not redemption, just an ending. And it came, not with thunder, but with stillness. She was found lying in her bed, one morning, eyes open but unfocused. Her hands were folded across her chest. There was no struggle, no wounds, no panic, just emptiness. The physician declared it natural causes. A quiet death. Unremarkable. She was 21. The king did not attend the burial. There was no state funeral, no public mourning, just a short procession in the early morning before the bells rang. A wooden box, a few coins for the gravediggers. No tombstone, just a patch of earth behind the old chapel where forgotten things go to sleep. But she left something behind, tucked beneath the floorboards of her chamber. Found by a maid decades later, was a small bundle of cloth. Inside, scraps of parchment, faded, stained, barely legible. A single line repeated over and over. I was more than what they made of me. And beneath it, in a trembling hand, if you read this, remember me not as Queen Dot, but as the girl who survived. It was never published. The maid showed it to no one. She couldn't read. She only knew it felt sacred, so she kept it, passed it to her daughter, who passed it on again, until one day, the papers surfaced in a quiet estate sale in the countryside, labeled only as miscellaneous writings from an unknown lady. A historian bought them for almost nothing, and almost threw them away. Almost. But she read them, and wept, because within those lines, broken, stuttering, desperate, was the truth no one had wanted to tell. A girl, a queen, a ghost, and the echo of a name that refused to be buried. Today, you won't find her face in history books. No museums, no statues, no portraits. But if you walk the garden path behind the old chapel, there's a single tree, bent, ancient, still blooming despite the soil. No plaque, no fence, but birds nest in it every spring. And when the wind moves through the leaves, some say, you can hear a whisper, I was more than what they made of me. She was not a queen. Not really. She was a placeholder, a performance, a body placed on a throne before she even understood what the word meant. But in her silence, there was defiance. In her survival, there was strength. And in her death, though uncelebrated, she did something few in her position ever could. She left the truth behind, not in official records, not in royal archives, but in torn parchment under floorboards in the dark. She didn't want statues. She didn't need monuments. She wanted a voice. And now, you've heard it. The story of the girl who was crowned before she bled, who was touched before she spoke, who was cast aside before she had the chance to breathe. This wasn't just history, it was reality, and it happened over and over across empires, dynasties, continents. How many names have we lost? How many little girls were crowned too early? How many queens became shadows before they had the chance to live? They want you to remember the kings, their wars, their victories, their bloodlines. But beneath every king was a queen buried alive under expectation, silence, and silk. And among them was her, the child bride, the forgotten consort, the queen who never got to rule. If her name remains unknown, it is not because she was unworthy. It is because they made her invisible. They taught the world not to see her. But tonight you did. You've walked with her, Da. Listened to her breath, Da. Felt the weight of her silence. And in doing so, you gave her what no king, no court, no chronicler ever did. Recognition. Her story may end here, but the silence she broke lives on. And in these dark hours, in these whispered truths, we remember not the golden crowns, but the bruises they covered. We remember not the glory, but the cost. And we refuse to let them be erased. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, if it disturbed you, if it made you look at history differently, subscribe to the channel. Because there are so many more stories waiting to be heard. So many voices waiting to be unearthed. And you, yes, you, are now part of that remembering. Click subscribe, and let's continue digging through the shadows together. Until next time, stay curious, stay haunted, and never stop questioning the past they sold you.